So I tweeted this out before heading to bed last night, and you guys absolutely crushed the like goal. So here we are. We're going to do this video. Welcome to CSGO School IGLing Basics. In this video, I'm going to break down the more basic things about IGLing, your roles, responsibilities, and things that you need to develop before you can be a really strong, competent IGL. While this is mainly focused for lower levels of play, such as MM stacks to IM, I will be sharing a ton of information in this video. And if you want to learn and maybe reevaluate some of the things you're doing at a higher level, this video will probably teach you something still. So I recommend you stick around. Here are the three main things we're going to focus on in this video. What is an in-game leader, and how do you know if you are an IGL, which stands for in-game leader, the responsibilities of an IGL, and creating some basic structure for your team to work with at the start. So what is an in-game leader, or IGL? Well, he is the leader of the team. He's the person that has the primary voice and determines what happens at practices, what we do mid-round, or what we do at the start of the round to attack or set up for the enemy team. He has the tactical voice of the team, so to speak. He is also responsible for keeping people in check and keeping the atmosphere calm, which are all things that I'll cover later on in this video. But how do you know if you want to become an IGL, and what are the key things you need to know if you can become an IGL? On the screen are a couple questions that you should ask yourself. Do you consider yourself a leader, and do you enjoy learning? Are you able to communicate and capable of teaching others? And do you have the time to create new strategies or watch other teams and get ideas? Also, do you want to be the primary voice of the team? These are all things that will determine whether you should be an IGL or you should probably do a different role inside the team. And they're all things that you need to answer before taking on this role. There's also multiple different styles of being an IGL. Counter Nature has done a great article on that can help you figure out what style fits you best if you want to take on this adventure and to become an IGL. The article will be linked in the description below, as well as Counter Nature's Twitter. Make sure you go give them credit. They're doing great stuff in the reporting scene. Now let's get into the 10 commandments of IGLing, or your primary responsibilities. So the first and most important thing for you to be able to do is distribute the responsibilities amongst the players in your team. Here are some key things that you might want to distribute. The reason this is so important is because you are not getting paid to play CSGO at this time. You are also probably not spending 8 hours a day just grinding the game with your team, because other people have obligations, and I'm sure you have other obligations that you have to do. You also need time to rest and relax, otherwise you'll burn out and you won't enjoy the game anymore. So dividing these responsibilities is a very important role as an IGL, and for a team, matter of fact. Having other players have responsibility makes them feel good. It's why being at school is so annoying, because you just sit there for 7 hours a day being taught over and over the same things that you were taught yesterday, and it gets very boring and nobody likes it. However, if you can give them responsibility that they can learn on their own, a lot of people will reflect from that and be, they'll learn well from that. So some of the responsibilities you might want to distribute is having your players watch their own game, watching pro games, and bringing new ideas to the table whenever you're at practice, doing your practice time. Another thing is you might want them to learn nades before scrimmages. So whenever you do get practice time, you can dry run, rehearse your strategies, and do it a lot faster and more effective, so you don't have to wait and have people learn nades. That way you get more time scrimming. Another thing is you might want your players to book scrims for you so you can focus on something else, or book the match times for you so you can focus on something else. And in an even more extreme case, you might even want a player on the team to take notes and make the strat book for you so you can focus on other things. But all of these responsibilities will allow you to hold people accountable when they don't do them, because inevitably people will mess up and not do these things. And accountability is something as an IGL that you need to establish early on. So having these small responsibility splits will give you something immediately early on to hold people accountable for. This one's important, keeping your individual form. You have to realize that as you improve, the players will also be improving around you. So if you want to be a top level IGL, a professional IGL, you have to also have professional level aim, and you can't neglect that. Divide responsibilities to give yourself enough time, and have a set practice routine for yourself to improve with. You do not have to be the superstar of the team, you do not have to be the hard carry of the team, but you cannot be a liability to the team. It's important that you try and reach a benchmark of about a 1 HLTV rating. If you can keep about that benchmark, which isn't great, let's be honest, that is all you really need to be a pro level IGL, in my opinion, because you have a lot more responsibility than shooting people in the head. So as the IGL, it is also your responsibility to prep and prepare for practice. Bring new things and have all of these things, all these bullet points ready to go before you start. It is also your responsibility to make practice as time effective as possible, so you're not wasting time while you're there. Some of the things that you'll need to be bringing to practice are some new tactics that you might have seen some pro teams running or that you've created, some new setups to counter things that you've been struggling with, maybe a new default if your old default isn't working for you or you want to approach the round in a different, unique way. You might also need to bring some new unique nades for that default or for these strategies, or even a new idea of how to play the map. Basically, you need to bring a new everything all the time. You just need to be innovating and creating as much as possible for these practices. You also need to have scrims planned or have somebody on your team plan and find the scrims for you. You also need to have a set plan on how you want the practice to go, how long you want to spend on certain things. And you also want to have a set idea of what you'll be practicing for that day, whether that be your defaulting on a certain map, so on and so forth. Now we're starting to get to some of the harder things that an IGL has to do, such as make decisions in-game as to what you're going to do as a team. So there's a lot of things that you're responsible for in-game, but some of the major ones are determining when you want to buy, when you want to save, or when you want to force buy, or when the enemy team is buying, saving, or force buying. You'll also be in charge of calling something early into the round that the team has a set plan for, such as calling a default, or calling an execute early on if you have an early round execute you want to run, or even a default into an exec, such as, all right, let's get Hall's control and then let's go back and let's exec B. Something like that is what you'd call early on. You'll also be in charge of calling mid-round when things don't go right. Let's say on that initial call, one of your Hall's players dies, however, your bracket player gets a kill on somebody that is Arch. You can then mid-round to take Arch control and maybe wrap A. Something like that. You also need to micro when it's needed. Not all the time. You're not responsible for telling players what to do. That again goes back to the whole distributing responsibilities thing. Players need to know how to play the game. You just need to know how to get them to all work together and play together. However, sometimes you might see something and you might want to correct how a player is doing something. The best example for this would be in after plants. Let's say you see a player that is planting the bomb and another player at new box on Inferno, and you want them both to play a bait switch setup at dark. You then tell them what to do, and that's micro calling. Finally, you need to drop your ego and realize that calling timeouts and asking for ideas is okay. Sometimes you'll run out of ideas and somebody on the other side of the map will have a good call that you wouldn't think of because you're playing on, the opposite side of the map. So, calling a timeout, asking for ideas, and getting a collective, discussion going as to what to do is 100% okay. You are human. You will not make the perfect call every round. The fifth thing will be maintaining the team's atmosphere, and this will be by far the hardest thing to do as an IGL. However, this is a very extensive topic to talk about. The first thing you need to understand about maintaining a team atmosphere is developing a team atmosphere. I've already talked about it before, but accountability is huge in this part, where you need to be able to tell players they are doing something wrong in a way that they understand and learn from, but not in a way that makes them no longer want to play or is destructive. Constructive criticism is key for developing an atmosphere. So if you don't know how to give constructive criticism, you probably need to either learn how or find players that can deal with destructive criticism for you to be an effective IGL. Another thing is you need to be able to boost confidence, be positive energy, and try and keep tilting and doubt from coming into your voice. As the leader of the team, your voice matters a lot. And if you start to doubt your calls, your teammates, or your ability to win the game, they will pick up on this. And this is a huge red flag for if you are going to be an effective in-game leader or not. So if this is something you struggle with, it's something that you need to be working on actively right now as an IGL every practice. Another thing is you need to call with confidence. You need to call like you know every single call that you have is going to work, even if you know it won't. You have to call in a way that inspires your team to win the round. You cannot call in a way that inspires the team to think that this call is not going to work. It's also 100% okay to call timeouts to maintain the atmosphere, such as when people are tilting to call timeout and talk about it instead of trying to play through into the next round. It's also okay to call a timeout if somebody does something insane and you need a second to calm down and refocus instead of just living off that high. As an IGL, you need to understand how roles work and how these roles can be performed in different ways. Entry frags, opping, all these have separate ways that they can work. For instance, Olaf in this round is entering in a way to create space, not for kills, while Rain is entering in a way to solely focus on finding entry frags instead of creating space. These are two different ways of doing the same role, which is entry fragging. You need to understand how these different roles work at different tempos. Olaf is going to be incredibly fast, and your strategy might revolve around an entry like that, or it might revolve around a slower tempo like the one Rain was going at. Another example is understanding opping. You can have an opper that is super supportive that will hold angles and support his team, or you'll have an opper that wants to get run boosted out long and is super aggressive. But you need to understand how both of these factors will change how you play. You also need to be able to understand how utility usage affects these roles. An entry fragger won't need his utility as much because he's going to be running into the bomb site and dying, so he can use his utility early on to help take map control. A support might be on the extremity of the map, so he might save nades for an execute, or you might want him to use his nades as a fake or to take map control on the other side. These are all things that you need to consider when you're understanding roles and how you structure your team. This goes for lurking and supporting as well, and identifying these will help you pick out players that you want and develop your own style and structure for how you want to play. This is another super important topic that we'll talk about more, but you need to be able to utilize your players effectively to get the best out of them. You need to be able to understand that every single player has different things they are good at and weak at. You have to identify where a player's strengths are, where a player's weaknesses are. You have to identify what they're comfortable with and uncomfortable with. You need to be able to place your players in spots that you think fit them because of these 4 things. You also need to be able to talk with your player and explain why you want to make that change. But the biggest thing with utilizing your players is having patience. Because even though players might be good at something and it plays to their strengths, again, there's comfort in everything. So if you do any sort of role changes like this based off of what you think would suit them best, you have to understand that they are not going to be comfortable immediately and that it'll take time before they get truly comfortable with what they're doing. But how do you determine what people's comforts are and what they're strong and weak at? If you have a player on your team that's very good at going and getting opening kills, you might want to put him in the entry frag role. But what you need to understand is that entry fragging means that they will not have very many nades and they will be going out in a very chaotic situation. Some players, even if they are good at getting opening kills, will not thrive in this sort of environment or this sort of role. And what would actually be better for a player like that would be a lurking role, where they get to use their nades and identify how they want to make plays at their own risk, at their own timings, and based off of what they see instead of based off of what you call. Another thing is players that are more supportive and are able to be alone will be good anchors, and you will probably put players like that as your trusted bomb site anchor. You slap him down on B, on Mirage, and hope to God he gets 3. However, they might not be comfortable doing that, even if they are one of the more quieter, reserved types. And you might want to get them to be more comfortable being in a rotation role where they are supporting people on the bomb site by rotating and helping them out. So these are all things that you might want to consider when you're identifying how to utilize your players the best. Responsibility 8 is reviewing your team's play. You have to be able to watch your own demos and figure out what's going wrong within the team if you want to be a good IGL. Otherwise, obviously, you're not going to be the main cause for their improvement. The main importance of reviewing your team's play is to fix problems. So one of the biggest things that you can fix is your communication. I highly recommend that you record your communication when you're scrimming so you can watch the games back with these voice comms in mind. What you're looking for is to focus on holes in your strategy where people make mistakes, and also where you can add new strategies to fix holes. Whereas if you struggle at going arch, adding an arch trap, for instance. Another very, very important thing is to take notes. Take notes when you're watching, take notes when you're scrimming, take notes when you're shitting. Just always have a notebook or your phone or something actively available for you to take notes when you get ideas or whenever you're, reviewing your games. This is a highly important thing that I recommend you do in your everyday life as well. 9th is anti-strating, which in reality is the commandment that can also be a sin. I'm a professional analyst, so I understand the importance of anti-stratting, but if it's done incorrectly, it can be detrimental to your team. So I want you to listen to what I say in this section very carefully so you utilize it in the correct way. The first thing to know about anti-stratting is that you're looking for certain specific things. You want to look at what your opponent's pistols are so you can develop a pistol round idea. This doesn't mean that you have to change your pistol to counter what they're doing. If you are specifically trying to counter another team's pistol, you are doing things wrong. You just want to see what they've done before so you know what pistol can work at a wide range of things that they might do. You also want to figure out who plays where. Where does their A lurker like to go? Where does their B lurker like to go? Where does their opper like to find opening kills? Who plays B side on CT side? Who plays A side on CT side? You want this information because then you can determine in the game when you see somebody that shouldn't be where they're at, potentially what they will be doing. You also want to figure out some key strategies that they like to call. Do they have a round that they rely on heavily to win rounds or find exploitable things? If they throw this nade, then they are this many people here. These are all the small tidbits that you want to figure out when you're anti-stratting, and you want to review these things with the team. But here is where the important thing comes in play. You want to use none of your anti-stratting until it's absolutely necessary. So if you are winning big by playing normal way, play normally. If you are struggling and you see them throw this certain nade that okay, this means they're coming A, this is when you want to pull out your anti-strat and set up for an anti-hulls pop. You do not want to be utilizing anti-stratting in a way where you change your entire game plan, your entire structure to accommodate to what the other team is doing. This is the wrong way to use anti-stratting. So like I said, this is the commandment that can also act as a sin. You also need to be cautious when reviewing this information with a team because it might make them play in a different way. They all need to understand that you only use anti-stratting when it's absolutely necessary and not as your primary game plan. And finally, and admittedly the easiest of your responsibilities, is to get new ideas. Watch demos of pro teams, not pro teams. Watch pro players stream, watch YouTube content, listen to podcasts, read articles, take notes. Just be an absolute sponge for information. The more that you learn as an IGL, the better that you can make your players, and therefore the better the team will get. Learn as much as possible, and this is another reason taking notes is so important. When you learn so much information, what will typically happen is your brain will push out old information. If you have notes on the old information, you can then review and keep both the old and the new information. So again, please, if you take anything away from this video, the most important thing you take away is to start taking notes. Now that you understand your responsibilities as an IGL, let's start to talk about how to create a structure for your team, starting with the most important thing, creating a schedule. Here's a simple template that I've used in the past. You meet 15 minutes before to talk about the plan and what you want to accomplish today. Your theory time is used for dry runs and implement new things. The orange squares are for you to schedule your scrims and put them down. And then the last hour is obviously to review the day and talk about what you did wrong and what you did well. Another idea is to have a more dynamic schedule. As you can see here, Sunday and Monday are more intense, where you spend Sunday focusing primarily on your theory crafting and developing a new map. Monday, you're primarily scrimming to get used to playing best of threes. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are more relaxed comfort days where you're still improving, just not as dramatically. It's also important when developing your schedule that you have off days implemented into the week and that you know when your matches are and they are also put in the schedule. You need to play with breaks and matches in mind, otherwise you will burn out and nobody will want to play anymore. You need to try and use your time effectively as well. You need to understand that you're not playing all day. You have a certain amount of time where you're all together to try and get stuff done. Therefore, you should try and have everything learned already so you can just rehearse it and get to scrimming. You should also have everything you want to cover prepared before you start. For instance, if you're playing an ESEA league, you will not know the maps that you are playing until the day before. So you should cover maps that you doubt you will play against a certain team in the future. That way you're effectively practicing on something without preparing for the match beforehand. Then once you figure out what the map is, you can isolate and solely focus on that one map for the upcoming match the next day. This is a much more effective use of your time instead of trying to guesstimate what map you'll be playing. Lastly, you want to be reminding your players of the communication rules and atmosphere you have in place, or you need to set these things in place to hold them to a standard. If you have a standard that you want to live up to as a team, then you need to constantly be reinforcing the standard. If you have communication rules and an atmosphere in place, you need to remind your players of that so they meet the standard. If you let this standard slip, your play will also slip. So holding people accountable, again, accountability, another thing that keeps coming up, is very important. Next, we're going to talk about the basics of what you're practicing, defaulting on both T and CT side, and different ways of doing executes. Essentially what a default is both teams fighting for additional map control. At the start of every round in CSGO, you are giving a certain amount of map control that you can gain early on for free. What you're doing in a default is trying to take away map control from the other team while also keeping map control for yourself. As you can see, this typically leads to a spread style of play. This also typically means that you're throwing nades to prevent the team from pushing areas that are easier for them to control, such as smoking off half wall on banana. So to provide an example for everybody, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a theoretical default for the map Ancient, which is the newest map to the pool. People probably don't have a way of defaulting on this map quite yet, so let's talk about it. What is your primary goal? I'm going to go through the same checklist that I have in my points as the two things that I want to accomplish. So first, my goal would be this B main area. This is what we are calling banana on my team. So the main focus for this ginormous area is to block the CTs from getting control of it and getting control of it as a T. Well, first you want to understand the timings. So Ts will get through this doorway before the CTs can peek this lane. So we have the advantage of getting this control. So what we need to accomplish is blocking them off from vision on these areas. So what I suggest is an entry fragger throwing a nade, so a smoke or a Molotov, towards the top here to block vision this way, right? And then from spawn, which is something that you will commonly see in pro play currently, is people are throwing this smoke for cave. And what this essentially does is for B main, this is smoked off, so people can't see down ramp, and this is smoked off, so people can't push through cave. Therefore, we are able to get this control by blocking their vision and then can go and take control of middle in a second sort of step, so to speak. Now that we understood what our B players are doing early on, getting control, and that's our primary goal, what is our secondary goal? Well, our secondary goal is to prevent them from pushing too deep here to where our map control doesn't matter. So what a lot of teams are doing currently is they're throwing this Molotov here to block people from pushing and peeking this lane with an op, because if they do that, they have full information basically to T-spawn. And then the other player will sit mid and try and hold off any sort of mid push. This player will also be able to support taking control of mid in the second step. So there you have a full developed default by having one player A main, one player mid, and 3 people taking control of this banana area. Now let's talk about getting the same amount of control in a different way. So in the first way, we block the vision here. Instead of blocking the vision, let's fight, because what teams will do is they can flash through the smoke and try and fight for the control. So let's have a way of countering that. So instead of smoking, I suggest we Molotov. This will slow them down from doing a push like this. Have one person come here and boost on top of the box, and then you have this head stack. So you have one on top, one at the bottom. Then the third person towards B will sit back here and throw this flash. This flash will allow both of these players to peek and fight for this ramp lane. So what we're essentially doing is we're stopping them from pushing with this, and then we are going to be able to actively fight by not blocking our vision. And this is a different way of approaching the round and getting the same amount of information. So since we want to focus towards that side, we obviously still need to block off cave so they don't just push through that avenue. So one person from spawn still needs to throw this smoke to block off cave. And then bam, the default still relatively looks the same, but we're doing a completely separate thing to get control. Let's talk about the A side so we can, mirror and do both sides at the same time. So they haven't really been pushing mid, they've been blocking the mid player here. He doesn't necessarily have to stay anymore because they obviously don't want to push for this control. So instead of that, he can come with the A player and you can walk in and try and get control of this A main area and force any player back because maybe the A player has been more aggressive than they have at mid. And then again, you're doing essentially the same thing, just in a different way to accomplish the same goal. And that is how you default. Now let's talk about defaulting on the CT side. Let's say for your CT side, you want to have 2 people contesting middle, you want to have 2 people contesting B, and you have 1 person left on an island alone at A. So what you want to determine is what map control you find most important at the areas of the map. As the A player solo, you don't really want to be pushing, so you're going to try and deny them. At mid, you have 2 people there, so you want to try and hold on to mid control as much as you can. And at B, you don't have enough resources to fight for the banana area. So what you want to do is try and accommodate by taking and holding on to control of something else. What you'll typically see at pro play at the moment is teams will try and block this cave area. So as soon as the T side takes control of cave, they will throw a smoke like this and block it off to block them from getting this area. Same thing for banana. Or ramp. Whenever teams are trying to come up ramp, what you'll see is teams will smoke here, molly here, nade here, any sort of here with utility you can come up with to block them. And what you're doing is you're stalling to allow a third person to come to B and actually be helpful at stopping an execute. As far as mid control goes, what you'll commonly see is you'll have the opper that posts up for people running out early on. Or if teams are throwing a smoke, he'll drop a one-way, and he'll play around the edge of it. The rifle will use his utility primarily to stop any sort of exec. Molly, flash, nade, throw something here to block them from getting vision like that. And he will walk down into middle and get control once he's down by smoking it off, and then he'll have full control of mid. That was a bad smoke, but you get the general idea. While the A player plays more passively from inside the temple and just holds, people running out for an execute. And that is how you default on the CT side. You establish what map control you want. You try and figure out ways of obtaining and keeping control of the map control. And then the rest of your players accommodate to those general principles. And next, I'm going to show the 8 ways of executing. First is the full execute. This is when you use the most amount of nades to force people out of positions that they're comfortable with. The full execute is best utilized against teams that are on eco or utilized against teams that don't have utility to stop it. However, obviously, if that's the case, you probably also won't have enough utility to do this. So this will be the rarest type of execute. But if I type in .throw full, you can see that we smoke off coffin and new box, or coffin and spawn. We molly new box, top second, and email, and have a collection of flashes for the entry fraggers to entry with. Second is the staggered execute. Think of the staggered execute in a step-by-step process instead of an all-at-once process. This is different from a double execute because on a double execute, you're trying to bait out utility before executing again. With a staggered execute, you are using your nades to get more space before actually executing. For instance, if I type in .throw staggered, what you'll see is that we are smoking first, then flashing to take control, and on the flash, we smoke spawn, molly coffin, and go then. What is happening is that we are using smoke and flash to get more space on the actual lane before using our nades to block vision and actually execute. Third is the double execute. The double execute is essentially you execing, doing a full execute, or doing a pop or any sort of fake, essentially, and then re-executing shortly after on the same bomb site. So, for instance, if I throw double execute, what you'll see is first is a standard just spawn, coffin, new box, molly, execute. This will bait utility from the CTs to smoke the lane, molly the lane. And then what we do is after those nades have faded, we immediately throw the second set, which is the second execute, which is how you get the name double execute. The fourth execute type is the fake. And what you do with a fake is you essentially use your nades in a deceptive way to go to another area of the map. For instance, this lane execute, while it looks like you're going to come lane, can be used to either fake and pull 3 people into A, which then allows you to go back to B, or it allows you to go for an arch wrap through this moto smoke that you throw yourself. All it is essentially faking that you're doing one thing while doing something else. So the next 4 can be associated in ways where you would group them together and consider them essentially the same. However, a split and a wrap are different, and a pop and a contact are different, and I'm going to explain those differences. So a split is when you are pinching a bomb site from 2 separate points with separate numbers. For instance, B, the split that you will see is 2 people from banana and 2 or 3 people from CT spawn. That is different from a wrap. A wrap is when you have a majority numbers taking a bomb site from a different direction. For instance, if you smoke off new box, go through CT spawn, through ruins to coffin, and in B, that is not a B split, it is a B wrap. Same thing for A. This is where you can probably visualize it even better. If you have 3 people wrapping around arches and 2 people coming up the lane, then it is a split because you're attacking the A bomb site from 2 points at the same time. However, if you had nobody coming lane or 1 person just holding lane passively for people getting aggressive and had 4 people wrapping around arch, then it's not a split per se, but a wrap where you're coming from the bomb site from the non-standard way, I guess is the best way of putting it. Finally, let's talk about the major difference between a pop and a contact. A pop is when you use your flashes in a way that is basically an execute. You'll sometimes even refer to pops as flash executes. And what you're doing is you're using your flashes to block off vision, take space, and even find kills, instead of using smokes to block vision and take the bomb site. A contact is different because on a contact what you're doing is instead of using your flashes to take space, you're just contacting in silently using no utility and just trying to take gunfights. And once you have your gunfight, then a support player behind you is going to start using his nades to let you take more space. And that is where the major difference lies. On a pop, you're using your nades to take space and then using your guns at the end. On a contact, you're using your guns to take space and then using your nades at the end. The final thing that I want to talk about is the structure when you're actually scrimming. The first thing that you need to keep in mind when you're scrimming is to keep a similar atmosphere that you have when you're in matches. If you are playing scrims in a way that is completely separate than you're playing in matches, matches won't feel comfortable to you, and then your scrims have been basically useless. You don't want to be avoidant and not call people out during scrims like you would in a match. However, what you do want to do is you want to create an atmosphere where you are learning no matter what, whether it's scrim or a match. This actually leads me into something that I learned about in sports psychology, which is the mastery mindset. The mastery mindset essentially states that there is always a way for you to learn and improve. Even when you're playing garbage open teams, you can still take something away, whether it be struggling to deal with a certain stupid push they're doing, or maybe you're trying out some things that you typically wouldn't try out against better opponents. What you're essentially trying to accomplish with the mastery mindset is always to be improving, 1% at a time. It's more effective to improve 1% at a time, 7 days a week, than to improve 5% 1 day per week. Another thing is that you should have set goals for each scrim. Whether you want to work on being aggressive or being passive, you should have a set goal. However, you should also have a variety of things you're going to work on. For instance, if your plan is to be aggressive, don't only focus on only being aggressive B, be able to be aggressive at A as well. So if your plan is to do something like this, you need to have multiple things prepared for the theorycraft session beforehand. This leads me into a topic that has a lot of discussion about it: how to practice or scrim things effectively. Because what's going to end up happening is you are going to practice or scrim or play to practice something that you talked about during the theory, whether it be a certain execute or a certain style of play. However, the person that you scrim against completely counters what you were talking about early on. So what's the point of continuing to run that against a team that completely counters it? If you do that in a match, you're going to get destroyed. So common sense tells you you wouldn't do it in a match. So why would you do it in a scrim? This leads me to the conclusion that you should play to practice, but not to lose. Essentially, you want to practice the things that you need to work on. However, you need to play in a way that also counters what the other team is doing. So you should call things that you've talked about, so you're still practicing, except to counter styles of play. This also develops a natural ability to deal with different things and different styles that different teams will play. To summarize what I mean here, call the execute that you're working on, see if it works or see if it doesn't. If it doesn't work, then don't call it again because there's no reason to. Call something that will counter what they did to beat it. If it does work, then you should call it again to see if they can figure out a way of countering it real time in the scrim. The final thing to note is that you should reflect between scrims personally. What calls did you make good? What calls did you make bad? And what plays were you making that were good and bad? Because you as a player need to reflect as well. And then you also want to reflect with the team after the scrims are done to get their ideas as to what was beneficial, what was detrimental, and where you can improve tomorrow. And that is going to conclude part 1 of this 3-part series on IGLing. Thank you guys for sticking through the entire video if you are still here. I know it's long. However, IGLing is a very complicated role and needs to be talked about a lot more, I feel like. As I talk over this video I took in my backyard of the sky when a thunderstorm was rolling in, I just wanted to go ahead and thank everybody that liked my tweet. Not only did you reach the 50 likes for me to create this series, you actually hit 150 likes to get the first episode up within 24 hours of that tweet, which is pretty mind-boggling to me. I also want to thank everybody for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Also, thank you for 250 followers on Twitter. That's pretty cool as well. But yeah, we'll see when the next part of this series comes out. Hopefully it'll be in the next couple of days. However, I want to leave with one final thing. On June 25th, I will be doing a stream on my Twitch at 2 p.m. EST to answer questions that you might still have. Anyways, thanks for watching. I will see you guys next time.